Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Picking Teams, a playbook for parents. We're very lucky to have Coach Kirk Wagner on the show again today. Kirk is the boys soccer coach at St. Pius X, a Catholic high school in the Atlanta area. In our last episode together, entitled Love Letters, Kirk shared some great ideas for parents regarding communication with coaches. In today's episode, we're going to dive right in and hear about Kirk's experience as a young professional soccer player in Europe.
Let me tell you, I love the fact that you are not only putting yourself out there, but it's like anything else. Since it's a passion project, that's a key component, right? That's the fuel that keeps you going. But I know all the coaches, even the podcasts I've caught up on that you've done already, you can just hear the joy that people have of telling their stories and you sharing. And indirectly, I know, as you know, we have some people that we share in our community, and they just think what you're doing is great. You've added real value. You've added real value. Yeah, just so you know that we always need feedback like that, and so just keep going, man. It's awesome. I love it.
Thank you so much. It's so validating. I think for a long time I lost that, not passion, but just feeling the value for what I was doing, coaching. When you get into this cyclical job, you just forget that you have passions. You forget that there's other reasons for doing what you're doing, and you tend to ignore all of these other important impacts that you can make on the community because you're focused on, in my case, winning. It was all about winning and getting to the national championship, everything that we did. And once I first started blogging, and that really helped to get some of these thoughts out of my head, and that made me feel, a lot better and provided some more value to what I was doing. And then obviously, as you know, I left Emory after 23 years and started my business where I coach student athletes, and now, and sometimes I coach coaches as well. And I find a lot of value in that as well. And then started this podcast, and then it's helped tremendously just get everything out, So I appreciate you recognizing that. That's really kind.
Can I just add something to you real quick? I want to suggest that maybe at some point you become the interviewer or interviewee.
Yeah.
Like someone that you trust and rely. Maybe you've done this. I know I haven't seen it on your podcast yet, but it would be like, I'm still learning about you, right? I don't know if I have the full picture, even though I've heard you speak on several of the podcasts. I've read your bio. I think it would be cool for you to kind of turn that, and that's more for yourself. I think, like you said, getting these thoughts out. I think it would be very helpful for you to kind of have someone that you trust, that you feel would be able to bring the best out of you and some of the stories, because that's ultimately what it is, right? We're all telling a story. And that would be cool. I would listen.
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah, I'll definitely think of that. I am almost done with a little book that I've written. It's more of like a guidebook for parents. So having to write that has helped to get some more
Amy,
of that
you're
out.
like this game. You're putting out this game again. I think you're making me feel little now. I got
No.
ass coach, all things kids and getting into college, and now a book. I mean, gosh.
It's a very little, it's an ebook. It's an ebook and it's a guidebook. I think it's 35 pages. So let's not get crazy here.
That's cool. But you know what that leads into something. Now that's just like the seed, right?
Yeah. But today, let's talk about you for sure, because you have a lot of great things to share as well. So to start off, tell me a little bit about your journey through sport.
Well, journey is a good word. That's for sure. And thankfully, I'm still on it. And, I think, as I said before, journeys are stories, right? And my story has several chapters. Probably we don't have enough time to go through them all, but I'd probably highlight three. The first would be dedicated to my parents, for sure. Carl and Roswitha Wagner, German immigrants, came to the country in the 50s separately. Dad via Canada to Texas, and mom via Ellis Island, New York, the traditional route to Texas. And dad's sort of playing career ended because back then there was no money in soccer, but he still played in sort of the immigrant league. In those days, 50s, 60s, 70s, it was really played by immigrants here in this country. And he still did that. And wouldn't you know, his team needed a goalkeeper, and mom's brother happened to be a goalkeeper. And mom shows up in tow to the game, sees dad on the field, dad sees mom, and I'm told it was love at first sight, evidenced by 6 months later they were married, and then 6 years later I came into the world. So I attribute a lot of my coaching to them. that's where it started. That's the seed, if you will. And it's just, the game's been in my blood a long time. And the takeaway from my dad was, my dad passed in 2013. And I remember distinctly to this day at the funeral, Mom and I had to go talk to all the people, and all of these players were there, some of which I hadn't seen since I was a little boy, and they came to pay their respects. And I just remember the refrain was, "Your dad changed my life." And he came from an era of what they used to call an action guy. My dad loved this country. He loved the freedom of speech and the freedoms this country affords. But he believed that words were great and important, but it was the actions that mattered. And so that reliability piece, I heard all these men now, they were men now, telling me at that funeral that it was the reliability piece that was so important to them. And so I carry that as a coach. So if I say something, my players know I'll do it. I stick by that. That's kind of my code of honor for myself. And then my mom, ironically, my mom's the one that actually got me in the game. It wasn't my dad. My dad was, we were poor, didn't know it, but we didn't have any money. Dad was trying to put food on the table, and Mom got me in the game. And she tells everyone, even today, that, she brought me in the world, and she was probably going to take me back out had it not been for some way to get me busy. And the game was in soccer was the venue, the platform for that. And what I take from my mom, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but my mom was an autodidact and taught me the importance of education. And so what I carry with me now as a coach is I never stop learning. You never stop learning your sport. I think that's true across all sports. And so just a hack for any coach, if you think you've learned the game, rethink that, because you could be a lifelong learner. And I'm still learning not only the X's and O's, but also because the game changes. All games change over time. But also just how do you teach? Because that's what we are. How do you teach? And the kids nowadays don't learn like you and I. I mean, I'm putting you in my hemisphere of age, but kids nowadays learn differently, and you need to understand that. We can't look through the lens of what used to be. So lifelong learner is what I learned from my mom. And so that's that chapter. I think if we fast forward to the second piece would be sort of the high school, college, post-college years. And we could have used you, Amy, back then, for sure. I was highly recruited out of high school to play soccer, but there was a big problem. I had no interest in going to college, zero. I was going to be a professional soccer player. That's all I cared about. That was my path. But my mom, again, that education piece was like, no, most of our people in our family did not go to university and get a secondary education, and you will, to her credit. But my mom flown all around the country, all these school recruiting visits. And I distinctly remember going to Massachusetts. Here I'm from Texas, going to Massachusetts. Never been there before. Didn't even know where it was. In Boston, it was in the winter, and their winter. They had late winter that year. And the soccer piece was taken care of. Like all these recruiting trips. I went to San Diego, I went to Florida, I went to Illinois, I went all over the place. And all the soccer was always the easy part. But the problem was the housing piece wasn't covered in the money. And I remember my mom finding out that the room and board in Boston was more than the mortgage on our house. You can imagine. And now remember context here. Context is, and the second part will also, hopefully this will undergird the second point, which is we didn't have internet back then. We didn't, you didn't have that. It was, anyways, we'll get on that in a minute. But I remember they tried to solve for that, all these schools, and this administrator in Boston was like, hey, tell me about your SAT. We can get you education funding, whatever. And Amy, I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know what an SAT was.
Wow.
Hadn't taken an SAT. Mom didn't know what SAT was. She generally knew, but we just, again, it sounds counterintuitive. Like, how do you not know that? But back then, and it still may be true now, you had a minority of families that knew what it took to get into college, and they had the whole processes down, and they had read the books, and they had family members, and it typically correlated with wealth. The wealthy families just had access to that, and there was a sort of avenue already preset for that. And being a poor immigrant family, not to say all immigrants, there were plenty of immigrants that had their act together too. We just didn't. I fell in the other camp. And so that was a big lesson learned for me, is that you need to educate yourself. You need to be prepared for the other side of that piece of, if that's, you're going the college route. And so that's why I think your podcast is great, because I think there's probably still some truth to that. More than
Absolutely.
I would be surprised at how true that is nowadays, considering all the information we have.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, that's all to say that I left all those trips with the same problem. Was I had the soccer piece right, the education piece wasn't there, and I didn't bother me, my poor mother again, what she went through. But I had a plan A, and that was to be a professional player, and so I was cool with all that. But anyways, fast forward to a coach had heard about me, came to Houston to see me play, and after he met with my parents, within 24 hours, I was in Austin, Texas, at a little small private university, going to school and playing soccer. I learned, later on that he basically was a master recruiter, and he told my mom, "Hey, we're going to build this program around your son, and he'll also go to a fine institution." I went to St. Andrews University, which is a very small private Catholic university, founded by Edward Sorn. I think he also founded Notre Dame. And so there's a sister relationship there with Notre Dame. And, of course, my family's all big school, great education. And I was in Austin going to school and playing soccer. And again, the takeaway as a coach for me, and those were great years. I loved St. Ed's. It was great playing there. I ended up being more of a player. The coach was a great recruiter, not a great coach. And I ended up becoming sort of a de facto coach for 4 years and recruiting and all that, which translated into me also getting offered a job there. I coached in college there, and that was great. But the lesson learned, I think, for your listeners there, and Amy, I think you know this, is you need to do your due diligence and make sure. I've heard several other podcasts, your other podcasts, and I think this was a thread that ran through all of them, which is, there is a school for you if that's the route you want to go. And believe me, I'm not the biggest advocate that college is the only route. I think there are other avenues. But know thyself, know thy child is super important. And fortunately, I think I got somewhat lucky and backed into a school that was right for me. Although I think I'd have been fine going the professional route too. Who knows in life at that early of an age, but I had to wait till later. But I had great years at St. Ed's, learned a lot, coached. And then I remember it was, and this is kind of segueing into the third piece. I remember it was 1994 and the U.S. was having the World Cup. And for the listeners who may not know, the World Cup is happens every 4 years throughout the world. It's all the top countries that qualify over 4 years, and then they play kind of like a Super Bowl. And then the winner becomes the world champion, basically, in our sport. And I decided to throw a backpack on and go out to California. And at the time, the Colombian national team was just my team. They were amazing. And I decided to go out there. And I'd always been sort of interested in the intellectual side of the game and coaching. Coaching. So I went out there to learn how they were doing what they were doing. And while I was out there chasing them around, I got the call that it was, I got an opportunity to trial in Germany, and I had to be there in 24 hours. So flew over to Germany and I think I landed at 9:30 in Munich, I remember, in the morning. And I had about 6 hours to prepare, and I ended up falling asleep on someone's house and being woken up to, it's time for you to go to your trial. And I was taken to this locker room, and here I am. Remember context here. Here I'm a German immigrant, right? I mean, my family's from German. I somewhat spoke the language, and go into this room, and there are these men looking at me like, who is this? Who is this kid? And that's when I knew I was in a different world. So anyways, trialed, made the team, was offered a contract, stayed there, played. And again, some great lessons learned there from my journey, and I use in my coaching, which is that. So the context here I'm a kid from a city, Houston at the time probably had 6.5 million people. And the city I was trying out for, Landshut, had, I don't know, maybe 120,000 people. I don't remember exactly, but German cities aren't as big as we think of the United States. But generally speaking, it was a smaller, big city in Bavaria, Germany. And I ended up living, though, with a family in a village called Kleham, which had about 100 people. So take that in context. I went from 6 million to 100 people. They had one road, they had a church and a bakery.
Wow.
I had no car. The people, no one spoke English. My German, they speak what's called Bavarian, which is a dialect, and which I speak now. That's where my dad's dialect was. My mom was from Stuttgart, so she spoke a different dialect. But my German was terrible, and it was like time to grow up, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so the takeaway there, I think, in my journey as a coach, and what I try and convince my players nowadays is you can do hard things. Like do really hard things while you're young. Go for it. And that, my context was both college and professional soccer. But for some, it's just college. Some it's not playing at a higher level. It's something else. But I try really hard to convince them that it's worth going through that process, because it changed my life completely.
Wow.
To the point to where it even affects my coaching.
How many years were you over there?
2. I basically ended up getting injured my first year and never really recovering from that. And my career was basically over very quickly. But I remember, Amy, too, just on that point, I remember, just to give you and your listeners some context as well, I distinctly remember I sat the bench for 4.5, 5 months.
Yeah,
now,
that's horrible. That's horrible. And being injured, how depressing is that?
I went from being the guy to sitting the bench, right? Yep. And so that was hard. But I remember I got my chance finally, and we were playing. So in Germany, the big team is Bayern Munich. That's the Dallas Cowboys, the Dodgers, the whatever other sport you want to lean in, the Atlanta Hawks, whatever. When the Atlanta Hawks aren't really the big team in the country, but you get the idea.
We're not big at all.
That's right. But I remember we were playing Bayern Munich's second team, and I was getting my chance. And I walked into the locker room. We were getting prepped, and the coach really didn't say anything. And the players were kind of real tense, and we just were going out to play. And so I ran up the captain while we were walking out to go to the field, and I was like, what's the plan? Like, here's my chance. Like, I'm going to play in front of Bayern Munich. They're going to see me. I'm going to go to the next level. And, this is it, right? And he just said, run. And I was like, what? He's like, run. So anyways, game starts. I run for 90 minutes. I barely touched the ball. It was the most miserable experience of my life. But I remember leaving that game. And by the way, the coach thought we were going to smoke. He had no interest. He was on his way of being probably fired anyways. We weren't having a great season. And, it's a business at the end of the day. And I remember being in the bus on the way home from Munich to Landshut. And I remember I could still see the lights and being in the smell of grass and just being in there. And I told myself that I will always be the coach I wanted to have in those kind of moments. And that was a huge, again, I would have never had that experience had that not been placed where I needed to be to feel that. But a huge influence on my journey as a coach was I decided right then and there, I wanted to be the coach that I wanted to always have. And I don't know if that's meaningful to parents but hopefully coaches will understand that. And for me, that means things like, when be aware of your players. I would have loved to a coach just said, hey man, you're an American here and by yourself in the middle of nowhere, just go out there and have a go, and believe me, to this day, I still fail at that. I still have players that I probably miss or should have done more for, what have you. It happens. But for this particular case, this coach was just not a very good coach. And that was another shocking revelation, right? I went to a country that soccer is the thing. And my naive mind was like, they're going to have the best coaches in the world. And, for those parents out there, I can tell you, and this is, again, my dad speaking to me, don't go off. My coach had played, the top level of soccer in Germany. He was renowned, and he was an awful coach. As a matter of fact, some of the worst coaches I've had, and I've had some big-time coaches that, I had one, you never know who's listening, but he was Portuguese national team, played with Eusebio, everyone knows this guy. Awful coach. Awful. Yeah. Worst coach I ever had. So parents, don't go off resume. Go off what you see and what the action, what you experience in real time. I think bios are important. Doesn't mean that you can't be a great coach and have played at a high level, but I think it's important that you see the material, and it's not just wins and losses. It's, how are they, and they might just not be right for your son or daughter, but here I was in a country that I thought had everything, and it was the exact opposite. I had a terrible coach, and subsequent coaches were better, but
Yeah.
I took that with me.
But that's such a great lesson. I mean, just because somebody is a good player does not make them a good coach.
No, gosh, no.
And, so often I hear families say to me, well, my daughter's being coached by this great, former professional tennis player, former professional soccer player. I'm like, okay, well, how's the coaching? Like, what are the coaching stats? Who have they coached? What have they done? Have they studied the game from a coach's perspective? Because it's completely different than actually being on the field. I mean, some people translate it better than others, translate what they've been able to accomplish playing wise to coaching wise, but some there is no connection there. So you have to be really careful.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to have been a former player, for sure. I think you can relate to a player at a different level. But in today's world, there's so much information, and there's so many great tools that a person who didn't play a particular sport can use, that it's just different than what it used to be. But, there's no excuses even nowadays that a coach doesn't have his act together.
Absolutely.
Because his or her act together, because we have tools that I would have dreamed of as a young player my coach is having. So fast forward, I think the third piece would be post-COVID. COVID for a lot of people was very painful and awful. I have to acknowledge that. For me, it was a blessing, frankly. It provided me the necessary nudge to do something different. I was blessed to be able to do that. I've always coached, but I was also in the business world, and I was miserable. I had the house, I had the cars, traveling the world, living the life, and nothing compared to coaching. And I desperately wanted to pursue that. But life, as you know, with families and kids, and it gets in the way sometimes. But COVID was the opportunity to kind of, in my own way, justify doing something different, having a go. And thankfully, my wife was super supportive in that and was also in agreement. And her dream was to be an entrepreneur, to try a business. And my dream was to focus on my coaching and raise a family. And we packed up our car in Texas with our little 10-month-old baby and decided it was between Colorado and Georgia. And because Georgia had a little bit more upside in terms of opportunities in her field, my wife's a civil engineer. She wanted to get in that space. We drove to Georgia not knowing a soul. And would you know it, came here and we discovered something that's close to you, which is tennis. It seems like first thing we learned, you cannot be in Atlanta, Georgia and not play tennis. Our whole world just changed because of tennis. And my wife is absolutely a crazy tennis player now. That led me into sort of getting into the soccer community, which led to me sort of coaching in club here and just finding a great community there, which just then led into Pius, what I'm doing now, which is coaching at St. Pius X Catholic High School here in Atlanta. And, that was really started out as an opportunity to help the school. They were, as with a lot of high schools, in transition with coaching and needed someone to kind of help out. And I was approached to do that, did that. And first year was a huge success. We went to the state final, and what a great experience that was. Hadn't been there in decades. And that segued into them wanting me to go full time and helping the program. And so I did that. I'm what they call a lay coach and love it. Absolutely love it. And we can talk more about that. But that's what I'm doing now is coaching high school and coaching club. And I'm fortunate to be able to do that and very thankful. Best, hand on heart, best job I ever had.
Wow.
Being coach first and foremost, I think, is definitely the best job I ever had. And then being at Pius and being in the club system here is just, I've found my place, happy place. And it is just, this game just keeps giving back to me. And I try and do the same. Really do.
That's great. They are really, really lucky to have you. Let me say that first of all. And, I've known a few of the boys that have been on that team, and they say wonderful things about you and your influence on their lives. So kudos to you for making that impact.
I have the greatest job in the world. I'm fortunate in that. Here's what my wife would say. When she's approached, she says, what does your husband do? She says, well, he works at the greatest charity in the world. Uh, for all the parents out there, trust me, there is no money in coaching. These
That's
poor
right.
high school coaches they can't feed their families. And part of that is because we love what we do. They get us for free. They get us for free. But, unless you're in the upper echelons of a sport or you're coaching American football at a top end high school football program, these coaches have multiple jobs, and it's
Yeah,
true at club too. Don't listen to the myth. Mostly it's you don't do it because of the money.
that's great. I asked that question because I wanted to get straight to that, and that is that coaches really don't make a lot of money.
Mm-mm.
And I feel like parents don't understand that. They don't know. They don't see the paychecks, but they have expectations that their coaches for their children are full-time professionals focused on their child. And so I think it's really important, especially, I recommend to parents, unfortunately, as often happens, as they are complaining about a coach and complaining about a decision of the coach, or, whatever the case may be. There's always going to be moments where parents unhappy with a coach, right? And we'll talk more about that in a second. But as they're going through that, I want them to take a step back. I always encourage parents, take a step back and let's think about this for a minute. Here you are talking about this coach who is probably not even making a quarter of your salary right now to be out there and is really donating their time. This is almost a pro bono effort on their part to teach your child this game, to work with your child, to teach your child valuable lessons, all of these great aspects that coaches bring to the table. And here you are disparaging them. Let's think about how much money they're actually making. Let's adjust our expectations here. Number one. And not that I'm saying their expectations shouldn't be high for coach. Not that I'm saying we as coaches shouldn't strive to give them the best. But I want them to know that that coaches also have sometimes other jobs because they have to make ends meet. They are not working 24/7 on one specific child. So I appreciate you being open about that and sharing that. And that is true at the college level too. I want parents to know that. And, I can attest to that after coaching for 23 years, that the salaries are not commensurate with what the value a coach actually brings to the table. Although in many situations, those coaches are considered full-time. In some situations, even in college, coaches are still part-time and have other duties within the department. So they are not 100% devoted to their charges.
Anyways, Kirk, thanks so much for coming back on the show. We've learned a ton from you during both episodes. Who knows, perhaps we can have you back on to interview me sometime soon.